Okay, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get started. This is the review for club officers. We're going to go through what club officers need to know and a little bit about the different club officer roles. This should be helpful if you are serving as a current club officer, if you are a club leader who is just getting started, or if you are thinking about running for an office and trying to decide which office is right for you. Anyway, we will get started, and here we go. So the first thing is congratulations if you are a new club officer. It is really exciting. It is something that you can add to your resume. It's helpful for things like 4-H Honor Club, other sorts of awards and programs that you want to apply for later on. And even if you're not in high school yet, if you are a younger, like middle school, elementary school, it's a really good way to build some leadership skills before you start in some of the district and state leadership programs. So really happy that you are serving in this role, and hopefully tonight will be some good tools to get you started. The first thing we want to know about clubs is what does it take to be a 4-H club? So the minimum is 5 youth. You need at least 1 adult leader. It's better to have 2 just for a transition plan if a leader moves or their kids age out or for whatever reason they need to stop leading. The adult leaders have to attend an orientation with NC State Extension, Wake County Center. Those are usually held every other month by Gina Garcia Somac on our 4-H staff. And the second part of the training is an actual 4-H club leader training, and that goes more into detail as far as club finances, club paperwork, risk and liability, things like that we really want to make sure that the adult club leaders know. All club leaders and all 4-H volunteers have to have a background check on file, as well as a volunteer application. So if you are not sure about those things, or if you're coming back as a volunteer and you want to check and see if things are up to date, feel free to contact our 4-H office, and we will help get you started with that. The other thing your clubs will need is space to meet, so you can meet at homes or barns. We have some that have met in libraries, churches, things like that. Basically anywhere that you have permission to meet that is a safe space for youth and gives you space to carry out the activities that you all want to do as a 4-H club. You will need a 4-H club calendar, and we recommend planning for 6 months at a time. 1 year can be a little intimidating, so 6 months is a good limit. Sometimes people will plan on a school year, things like that. But it is important that the 4-H office gets a copy of your calendar. We use that to share information about what your group is doing with new families who might call our 4-H office and want information on the 4-H program. So please make sure that you turn in your calendars every year. Enrollment forms for youth are required. You can print them from our website. You can also get them from the 4-H office if you need paper copies. The medical forms do not have to be notarized for 2018. Yay, we're also happy about this. They are not required because some clubs that are meeting in schools and other locations that already have a medical form or something like that in place don't need 2 of those. So we highly recommend the medical form if you are a community-based 4-H club. The good things about it has space for parents to share with club leaders about allergies, things like that, any special needs, insurance information, things that you would need if the worst happened and someone actually got hurt during your club meeting. What happens in a 4-H club meeting? So there's 3 main components of a 4-H club meeting. The first is the business part of the meeting. These are things like the call to order, the 4-H pledge, the American pledge. You want to do a roll call to take attendance. Usually the secretary from the club will do that. The secretary will also share the minutes. The treasurer will share the treasurer's report, and of course you will officially adjourn at the end of the meeting. There should also be a program component to your meeting. So maybe this is a guest speaker. It could be, that the club is actually out doing something. It could be that you bring in samples of horse equipment to look at or to prep for horse bowl. It could be that you have somebody who brings in dogs to do a pet demonstration project. Anything like that is applicable to the club meeting and that is of interest to the youth who are in the clubs. The last part is either a recreation part of the meeting or a service component. And so we want all of our clubs to do at least one community service project per year. Hopefully you're doing more than one. And then the other thing is just the recreation is important. That's a time for 4-H club members to get to know each other, to catch up on what's going on in their lives. Part of what makes being in a 4-H club so great is that it is a chance to build relationships with other young people and with adults that care about young people. So we want that to be an important part as well. There are a few things that go across all different offices. We want to make sure that all 4-H club officers know these things. We want to make sure that you understand if you're a club officer, it's your job to lead your club, but not necessarily to do everything in the club. You're certainly going to plan the program for the year with the other officers. You're going to welcome new members. You're going to conduct the meetings and kind of keep the business part moving. You're going to keep the records. Those are important. If we need to go back and find out something was missed or we can't remember a decision that the club made. You also want to find a place for every club member. You'll get a lot of new members that come in throughout the year, and you want to make sure that they are finding their place in the club just like you did when you came in. You also want to maintain a positive relationship with everybody in the club as well as your advisors. We need to make sure that you maintain contact with the extension office so that we know what your group is doing, and that you understand the roles and responsibilities of your office. And I always say, if you don't know, ask questions. Ask your club leader, ask your 4-H agent, ask any of our 4-H staff. We are here to help. We love 4-H clubs and we want to see them succeed. The president, your role is basically you plan the business part of the meeting. You are responsible for things like getting there first, making sure the seating is set up, making sure the lights and the temperature, it's not super hot or super cold in your meeting space. You're also supposed to share a meeting agenda in advance. We want people to know why they would come to a 4-H club meeting and what they can look forward to during their time there. It's important that the president knows how to conduct a meeting in an orderly way, how the group should take votes, how motions should be presented, things like that. There's a separate training that we're going to do on parliamentary procedure because it's pretty detailed. So be sure to look for that if that is of need in your club. The president is also responsible, with help from the other offices, for starting and stopping the meeting on time. We need to be respectful of club members' times. The president presides and calls the meeting to order and goes through the business agenda. If the secretary is absent, make sure that somebody is there to take minutes from your club. This is also helpful because you can send out your minutes after the meeting so that anybody who wasn't able to come to your club meeting can catch up on what happened, and then they can be ready to jump in the next time. You also want to keep order in the club. Sometimes it's easy for a group to get off track. Your job as the president is to kind of redirect them and bring them back. And the last thing is, it's really tempting as the president to talk a lot and keep it going. Your job is to kind of be the pilot and not talk the whole time, but your job is to kind of guide the discussion and make space for other people in your group to contribute. The president only votes in cases of a tie vote, except if there's a ballot. So if there's a ballot, the president gets to vote. If there's no ballot and you're just raising your hands to vote, then the president only decides can only vote if there's a tie. The president appoints committees. So that could be things like a program committee, a service committee, a social committee. If your group is doing a horse show, maybe you want to have a hospitality committee to make sure that club members are having a good time during that event. Maybe you want a service committee to make sure that your club has community service opportunities planned. The president also works closely with the 4-H club leader, sometimes also the 4-H agents, to make sure that the club meetings are evaluated, make sure people are getting what they came to get out of the 4-H club time. You want to work with all of your officers to plan the meetings. You don't want to just kind of make the agenda by yourself. You also want to check on the progress of committees, so that this is how the president kind of keeps the work moving forward throughout the year. Make sure that you delegate responsibilities. So share, yes, the president has all of these different responsibilities, but the president also can share those with other people and just follow up to make sure that that work gets done. The president also wants to have a backup plan if they cannot go to a meeting for some reason, so that everyone knows who is in charge of that meeting, and that person has time to prepare to take over the roles. The last thing we want to do is to work with the other club leaders and members. I think we've already said that, but I think that's really important so that you all are working together. The next role is the vice president. And so a lot of people just think this is kind of the secondary president if the president's not there. That is an important function of the vice president role, so that you have somebody who's ready to step in. But the vice president can also be a really strong parliamentary procedure person to kind of help keep things moving, especially if there's a motion and a vote and things like that. The vice president should know the duties of the president and probably the duties of all of the other officers as well. And most of the time, your club vice president is going to be in charge of the program committee, which includes things like the calendar of events. A lot of those things on that calendar are going to be programmed, so that sort of makes sense. You want to make sure that you know that you're working closely with the president, the leaders, other officers on all the different activities. Again, just making sure everybody is included. And then, usually the president and vice president will check in either before or after a club meeting, maybe both, to go over any special work that is needed. And typically the vice president will sit near the front of the room with the president. A lot of times the club officers will kind of all sit in a row at the front, although that's not, required. The secretary usually does sit at the front of the room, even if not all the other officers do. And that's so that they can see who is in the room. They also can see who is talking, and make sure that that is noted down in the minutes. The secretary records any officer election results, any committees, things like that, because a lot of times people go, what committee was I on? And they're really looking to the secretary to come back and look at the notes from previous meetings and remind them. The secretary should be the person who calls the roll in each meeting. And sometimes they'll have to stand and read the minutes of the last meeting. Sometimes they'll just pass out a copy, like a printed copy of the meeting minutes. Usually when the meeting minutes are read, sometimes there'll be a correction. Maybe it's, a date was wrong. Maybe it's a name was wrong. Somebody wasn't on the committee that you said they were. It's important to make those corrections so that way the minutes can be corrected. And, if there's questions in the future and you go back to that your information will then be correct. The secretary usually is also the one who kind of keeps the unfinished business from the last meeting coming back at the next meeting, so that you make sure that things don't drop through the cracks. And then, the last piece really deals with correspondence. And so making sure that if there's a thank you note for a guest speaker, typically the secretary will be the one to write it. Sometimes all the club members will sign it, but they would kind of initiate that process. And then the last thing is the secretary also keeps reports of different committees and resolutions. So if there are bylaws for your club, or if there is, any sort of planning document, things like that, they can all go in the secretary's notebook. And if once you have it in the notebook, that can really help everybody keep all of the things for the club in one place. If there are articles that go out, and if your club has a reporter, sometimes the reporter will be the person who goes through and sends those articles to the newspaper. But a lot of times, if there isn't a reporter, the secretary will work with them. Sometimes the secretary also, helps with other duties if the vice president or the president are out. And then just making sure each motion is written down as stated, and making sure we know who, whether the motion carried or not, is important. And I think we've already covered most of the other stuff on this slide, but again, just making sure everybody is, there's a record of who is on which committee, who had different responsibilities that were assigned, so that the officers as a whole can follow back up and make sure that the work is moving forward. The club treasurer can be a big role or not, depending on how detailed the finances are. Some of our clubs have, quite complicated budgets, and they, get lots of donations and things like that. And so certainly that increases the amount of record keeping. Some clubs have no funds at all, in which case, the treasurer role maybe isn't needed for every single meeting, but it's even if people are bringing their own money for different activities, it's a good idea to keep a record of what club members spent. If there is, a bank account, the treasurer usually sits on that club finance committee, and definitely is a part of any fundraising decisions that happen. Each 4-H club that has finances in their name should develop a club budget. It can be a really simple budget. So what do we need for snacks? What do we need for field trips? What do we need to buy gifts for guest speakers, or thank you notes for guest speakers, or whatever it is? It doesn't have to be a large budget. We do want 4-Hers to make sure that they are the ones who are helping prepare the club budget. A lot of times the adult leaders want to do it, but we really want the 4-H members to get the experience of making a budget, trying to stick to a budget, and then even in the next year, looking at what was spent last year as they make those decisions. That's one of the life skills that we really want 4-Hers to get. We also want to keep an accurate count of any money that comes into the club or goes out of the club. Club leaders get a lot more of this training in their orientation and training. So they will have a lot more of the details to share with the treasurer, but it is important to keep records and to make sure that your club money is separate from your personal money. That's probably the biggest thing. And then the second thing would be to make sure that you keep a record. Also keep in mind that your club should have an EIN number with the IRS if you decide to have funds in your club's name. And then the last note on here is just about depositing any dues, any money that comes into the club as soon as possible into the club account. And a lot of times people will say within 24 hours. Part of it depends on how close you live to the bank, how accessible, sometimes some banks will let a youth treasurer be on the account. Sometimes they require an adult. So that can vary a little bit with each club. But the important thing is to make sure we keep records and make sure that as soon as it is possible to deposit that money, that it is deposited and that it is deposited into a 4-H club account. A lot of times clubs do not do this next thing, which is to ask permission before the club conducts a fundraiser or applies for a grant. We want our 4-H clubs to be able to get funding for their different projects. We just the finances are complicated because 4-H is not a nonprofit. So sometimes when you're applying for a grant, they're going to be looking for a 501c3 number. Your club will not have that. We do work with the North Carolina Ag Foundation and the 4-H Development Fund in some cases to help secure funding for the benefit of our clubs and our youth in our 4-H program. So definitely let us know if you're planning to do fundraising, and definitely if you're applying for a grant. That way we can make sure that we are kind of going down the right avenues for that. The other thing with this is the more notice we can have on it, the more helpful we can be, because sometimes it takes us sending stuff to the Ag Foundation, and that can take a little bit of time to make sure that everything is signed off on, that we have a chance to get questions answered, and that any documentation that is needed is submitted. We also want to provide receipts. So if you have people who are making donations or people who have purchased supplies, you're going to want to make sure that there's a receipt that you take from them to justify the reimbursement. And if they're giving you money, that you're issuing them a receipt. The treasurer should not spend any money out of the club account that hasn't been approved by the club. That's why that section on the business agenda is important. Not all clubs will have a reporter. It is a good way to share the leadership responsibilities around if you can, and if you have more youth who want to be in leadership roles. And so the reporter can, take notes of from the secretary in the club and make a little newspaper article. They can share it on social media, things like that. They can definitely also share it with our extension office. It's important to do that timely if you're going to try to get that news out there. A lot of times the news, won't cover it in a large market, and they definitely won't cover it if it's old news. You want to make sure that your club keeps a record of, a scrapbook or notebook that has old newspaper articles, things like that about your club, if you can. And then any sorts of photographs of special events, things like that. We have some clubs who will be in operation for 25 years, 30 years, things like that. And so you may not think it's important on that particular day, but somebody 20 years from now, when they're doing a club anniversary celebration, might want to go back and pull out that picture from 20 years ago at your club meeting and share that. Sometimes we think about what's great for us, but sometimes we should also think about, what might be really neat that we could do for 4-Hers in the future. And sometimes the reporter, if there is a publicity committee, sometimes that's the group that does the social media and things like that for your club. A lot of times the reporter will serve as the chair. The sergeant at arms is another club officer position that not all of our clubs have, but can be really helpful in keeping the club business moving. The sergeant at arms can help with the setup of the room, the flags, the banners, those kinds of things, and kind of function as like a club safety officer. Extension cords are a big risk in 4-H club meetings. We've had a lot of people trip on them, things like that. So just looking for smaller things, but things that can be a problem. The sergeant at arms can also lead the 4-H pledge or the Pledge of Allegiance, and definitely should make sure that that is a part of the 4-H club meeting. And then, the other thing that the sergeant at arms does sometimes is they're a reminder of the rules of the meeting, kind of keeping the meeting flowing. Not so much the details of Robert's Rules of Order, because that usually falls to a parliamentarian, but just in general, helping people know the rules, helping people know where, facilities are, so where's the bathroom, things like that. Sometimes they'll also welcome guests. The historian works closely with the reporter if there is one. Sometimes there will be a reporter and no historian, or vice versa, and that's okay. It really depends on how many youth you have who want to serve in an officer role. A lot of times the historian will also collect, kind of like the reporter in some cases, memorabilia about events and activities. They will take a lot of photographs. They will compile them in some sort of scrapbook. Maybe it's an online album in your 4-H club, social media account, things like that. At different points, they might pull out the scrapbook at different events to kind of do a look back or this day in history or something like that. And then, the last part is if anything is going on in your club that seems really neat, or you might want to reach out and kind of recruit some new members, either the reporter or the secretary or the historian can share it with the 4-H office so that we can share it on our social media channels. The parliamentarian is probably the least used role in a 4-H club, and it's often a very useful one. If you have a child who is in your group who really likes Robert's Rules of Order, there's a whole book on it. There's also like a Cliff's Notes version that can be helpful, and we're going to do a future training on it to kind of break down the basics of it, because it can get really detailed and involved, but the whole purpose of Robert's Rules of Order is to make sure that there is a process that is a fair and open process for making decisions. And so that's what we want to use for 4-H clubs. It doesn't have to be super, super official, but I think if you can learn the basics, it really will help your business move forward. You want to, probably the parliamentarian is also going to have to not just know Robert's Rules of Order basics, but they're going to have to share it with the club members and sometimes the club leaders if you want that to really be used in your club. And then on a rare occasion, we'll get a question about how does this go? What happens now? We're really stuck. And the parliamentarian is the person that we go back to make any final decisions on discrepancies in the parliamentary procedure. A lot of times people will think that's the president, but that's actually a really specialized role that the parliamentarian gets to play. One thing that we should have probably talked about a little bit with the secretary role, but I think this is kind of important for all of the different officers, is what kinds of stuff goes in the minutes. Sometimes we see club minutes and they're so long, and they just contain so many details that you kind of get lost and it's hard to read. The meeting minutes should definitely contain the name of the 4-H club, the date, the time, the place of the meeting, the names of the officers, who was in attendance. Usually it will also include a note about the secretary's minutes being approved from the previous meeting. And then it will contain the treasurer's balance. Another random thing that a lot of people don't know is that you don't motion to accept a treasurer's report. The treasurer just gives the treasurer's report. There should also be a summary of any reports given. So if your social committee met in between meetings and you want to report out on a cookout or a camp out that your group is doing, this is the time to make sure that they are in the minutes. Again, that helps for members who aren't there, or for parents who may not have stayed for the whole meeting, but will read the minutes and catch up from there. The minutes should also make sure that any motions are contained in there. So who made it, who seconded that motion. Sometimes, the exact wording can seem like a really small detail, but making sure that that exact wording is recorded. So if it's we agreed to spend X number of dollars to support X, project. You really want to say, is there a date or a time limit or a dollar limit to what you want to pass, or what the group is approving. You also want to include the time that the meeting was adjourned, and then you want to include a note about who recorded the minutes. And that way, if there's any questions, people can go back and talk to the person who recorded the meeting minutes. Hopefully that was an introduction to the different officer roles. This is not meant to be an exhaustive training. It is just supposed to give you an idea of how club officers function and what specific duties are associated with each role. Definitely contact the 4-H office if you have any questions. Again, we're happy to help clubs and officers and leaders to make sure that clubs are functioning effectively and that they are safe places and productive places for our young people. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you again for another training soon.